Hey, welcome to In the Den with Dr. Jen. And it's our Halloween episode. So with that theme in mind, we'll be discussing the Twilight Saga, which is about vampires, and talking about a new book called Seduced by Twilight. And our sexual fun fact asks you, who is more likely to engage in anal sex? Stay tuned. All right, I always love our Halloween episode. Yay, Halloween! And I'm dressed in an 80s outfit because I figured I'd reflect back on my years of innocence. And I even have a photo here of me from 1988. I am the one on the top right corner of the pyramids with my short feathered hair. So this year, for Halloween, we're going to discuss a pop culture phenomenon about vampires, the Twilight Saga. And I actually personally don't know a lot about Twilight, but we have a local San Diego professor who knows a ton about this, and specifically a lot about bringing a feminist perspective to analyzing this book and movie series. Today we have Natalie Wilson, who's a professor of women's studies and literature at Cal State San Marcos, specializing in pop culture, feminism, and has a particular interest in sexuality, monstrosity, and the body. She blogs for Ms. Girl with a Pen and Womanist Musings, as well as her own blog, and had 2 books that came out this year, Seduced by Twilight and Theorizing Twilight. Good to have you on the show, Natalie.
Thanks for having me.
So I know that you do a lot of teaching, writing, and research around women's equality, and that you tie it to a study of popular culture. How do you do that?
Right. Well, I think oftentimes popular culture is written off as just entertainment, as if it doesn't matter. But actually, popular culture is sort of a huge barometer of what's going on in our society. So I like to think of studying popular culture as sort of taking the pulse of society.
Nice.
And when you look at popular culture, you can tell how healthy or unhealthy some of our views are. And as a women's studies professor, I'm particularly interested in gender and sexuality. And that is what sort of spurred my interest in writing about the Twilight Saga, because it's a huge cultural phenomenon, and I feel like it sends some rather problematic messages about gender and sexuality.
And I know you've even taught a class about this,
Yes.
a college semester-long class about it.
Yes.
Nice. Okay, so what would you say that the Twilight Saga says about gender, women's sexuality, and sexual health?
Right. Well, in terms of gender, I would say it's rather regressive.
Okay.
Very traditional roles of gender. For females, you're supposed to first fall in love, then you're supposed to get married, no sex before marriage, and as soon as you get married, you should have a child. And you should also give up college, because you can't go to college and be a mother. That would be impossible. So very sort of regressive ideas in terms of femininity and the female role, really marriage and motherhood. And then in terms of masculinity, the males that are held up in the series as the desirable males are very controlling, almost hyper-masculine, very strong, very muscular, very domineering, and very possessive and controlling and even violent with the females in the series.
And that's what I was going to ask. I know there seems to be a connection between violence and sexuality. So what have you found around that?
Right, so in terms of sexuality, the series is often called abstinence porn. It kind of drips with sex, but no sex ever really happens. So there's desire around sex, but you're not supposed to have sex before marriage. So there's a definite abstinence message. And in particular, the female of the series, Bella, is held up as the one that's responsible for not getting the males too excited, and she's sort of the policer of chastity.
So all the responsibility is put on her.
The responsibility is put on her. The other thing is that there's this equation with sex and death. Because she's attracted to a vampire and a werewolf, both of who are supernaturally strong and could kill her very easily. So the idea is if you turn them on or you get too involved, your life is at risk. So there's this equation with sex equaling death for females.
Yikes. What about in terms of like the importance of how these messages are showing up? And one I'm thinking specifically is, what about, because I know if you look at our rates of STD and pregnancy compared to other countries, There's a big difference. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that happens with sexuality in the novel is there's lots of desire, but there's no serious conversations around sex. And there's, you know, you will be damned if you have sex or you will die. But there's nothing about contraception or sexual health or what a healthy relationship is. In fact, Edward is quite abusive. On their first night, their first honeymoon night, Bella ends up black and blue the morning after because he's so strong and he's holding on to her so tightly. And this is framed as very hot and exciting rather than as some sort of sexual violence.
And didn't one of them black out with that also? Is that right, or didn't have memories of that?
Right, so she wakes up and she's in this, you know, post-coital euphoria. Meanwhile, she's completely black and blue and supposedly doesn't realize that she's black and blue until she looks in the mirror. And then when she looks in the mirror, she calls the bruises decorations, and that they are, you know, him decorating her with his love. Wow. So this sort of blurring of sexuality and violence and sex being dangerous. And then what you were saying about STIs and teen pregnancies, it is a series that's hugely popular with teens and young people. And there's no emphasis on you know, that these types of violent relationships are unhealthy. In fact, they're held up as desirable. There's never a discussion of contraception, or, you know, and she does end up pregnant, of course, the night of the honeymoon. And
her first time.
Yeah, her first time.
Of course.
And then that is framed as, you know, the happy ending. Like the marriage and her becoming a mother are framed as the happy ending.
So you've said a lot already that's very impactful. Anything else that you can speak to what you think, how this impacts the teenagers that are fans of this?
Well, I think an important thing to point out is that it's had a huge cross-generational impact. So even though teens are a huge part of the fandom, it's also very popular among 20 and 30-year-olds, and there's the Twilight moms, and so it's really had a pretty big cultural impact. One of the things you might all have heard of is the tendency to have a team, like your Team Edward or your Team Jacob.
Right.
And that has sort of spilled out into other, I mean, vampire shows, but other shows as well, like True Blood, there's Team Eric or Team Bill. But this idea, if you notice, all the teams are male. So it's this very sort of old idea of male as the sexual aggressor. They're the one who's in competition for women.
Very hyper-masculine.
Yeah, very hyper-masculine. And then women are held up as, you know, they can be the fans, or they're literally sort of the objects that the men are fighting over. So it seems to me, in terms of its spreading out into popular culture, it's going backwards and sort of regressing to older ideas about sexuality, where the male was supposed to be the aggressor and the female was supposed to be the passive, you know. And of course, very heteronormative and very married monogamous sex is the only type that's allowed. And then there's this huge sort of hyper-masculine, the bodies of the males in the films as well as in the books, super muscular, super strong. So those are bodies that are often associated with being violent. And in the saga, they are violent, but it's held up as he just couldn't help himself. Either he was so turned on that he couldn't help hurting me, or he loves me so much that he became violent and became jealous. Yikes. And with the rates of, you mentioned STIs and teen pregnancy, United States also has the highest rates of teen sexual violence. So it's kind of saying that teen sexual violence it's just because he loves you so much, or it's actually romantic rather than problematic.
Oh my gosh. Thank you. That was a ton of information. Give a hand here for Natalie Wilson. Wow. And if you want to find Natalie online, you can visit seducedbytwilight.wordpress.com. The sexual fun fact, and I got condoms and lube to whoever gets it right. Question: who is more likely to masturbate, engage in oral sex, and engage in anal sex? Someone with more education or somebody with less education? More. Oh yeah! Yeah! Yes, well done. It's actually somebody with more education. Do you have thoughts of why? More world experience, right. It's believed to be because through education they're exposed to more views and ways of thinking, including a broader view of sexual play and, you know, what's appropriate or what they're willing to do. And I picked this one for us since we both have PhDs, you know, we're pretty kinky. Our Den recommend. Well, I couldn't have Natalie here sharing her in-depth analysis of Twilight without specifically addressing one of her new books, Seduced by Twilight. And Natalie writes, the book insists that we need to examine how, why, and to what end we're seduced by Twilight. And overall, this book aims to reveal why the saga has become such a huge cultural phenomenon and what its popularity reveals about the contemporary cultural moment. So who do you think would most appreciate a book like this?
Well, I think anybody interested in analyzing popular culture and why certain things are popular. I mean, if you think about something like the Beatles or Michael Jackson or Lady Gaga, like there's a reason that those people become popular at their particular cultural moment. Nice. So people interested in popular culture and why certain things capture us and what it all means. I think Twilight fans, definitely. Some of them feel like I'm trying to make them hate the book, and I'm not trying to make them hate the saga. I'm just asking them to think more deeply about it. I mean, when you really love something, think about what about it is seducing you, and is it something that should be seducing you? Well, so Twilight fans, and then it's also being used in some college courses. So I think
that's perfect.
Useful in college courses, hopefully.
So do people say that they feel like it ruins it, or do they feel like it opens them, opens them to new understandings of this in themselves?
Right. The majority of people, and when I taught the course at Cal State last year, the majority of people felt like it opened it up and made the analysis deeper. That nice. they didn't feel like they had to hate it, and I never said don't read Twilight, don't watch the movies, but just think about the messages it's sending more deeply.
Awesome. So if you want to get your copy of Seduced by Twilight, check it out at this website. So, in conclusion, I'd like to thank our live audience for being here to talk about sex, and Natalie Wilson for sharing her Twilight research. Yay! You can find me online at drjensden.com and on Facebook and Twitter at drjensden. Get in touch with me if you want some one-on-one counseling. I promise I won't dress like this. And you can do that in person or via Skype, or if you're in need of a university sexuality speaker on sexuality or gender. Now, don't miss the funny or outrageous outtake after the credit. And as always, be kind to yourself.
And there's the whole study about why women read romance, and I think there's lots to that. One of the arguments about why women read romance is that it makes sexual violence, which is so common in the real world, it makes it romantic. It makes it seem like, oh, he's doing it because he cares about me. So this one theorist, Janice Radway, argues that we read romance because it makes us more able to sort of deal with the violence that is part of contemporary society.
Yikes. I know. As women's studies people, we're always buzzkills. Yeah. I know, sociologists too, yeah.